All right, and we will get started now with Judith Enck, former EPA Regional Administrator and President of Beyond Plastics.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm really delighted to be here with allies who we've all worked so hard together to pass this important packaging reduction bill and also other essential bills dealing with climate change. I'm honored to be joined by Monique Fitzgerald, who is the co-founder of the Brookhaven Landfill Action and Remediation Group, and she is a climate justice organizer with the Long Island Progressive Coalition. We're also honored to be joined by Renae Kimble. Renae is the president of the NAACP New York State Niagara Falls branch, and Blair Horner, senior policy advisor of the New York Public Interest Research Group, NYPIRG. I will talk for a moment about the disappointing end of the New York State Assembly session and our concern about the Assembly not passing the packaging reduction bill introduced by our really heroic sponsor, Assemblymember Deborah Glick. And then I'll turn it to others just to make comments on the Assembly session. So first, I want to provide some overall context. 1 hour ago, Governor Hochul held a press conference alerting New Yorkers about the extreme heat that is about to hit our state. 2024 is the hottest year on record. The past decade is the hottest decade on record. A few weeks ago, large parts of the state were under air quality advisories. The climate crisis is here. The Assembly failed to meet the moment. At the same time, the Trump administration has launched an unprecedented assault on the very foundation of our federal environmental protections that have been in place for 50 years. These federal environmental laws provided us with cleaner air to breathe, safer water to drink, and while not enough, some small steps that recognizes the seriousness of climate change. And just this past Tuesday, we learned that the Trump administration will stop enforcing the federal ban on asbestos. And that pause will last for a few years as the Trump administration decides whether or not to let the ban continue at all. Asbestos is a carcinogen which has been banned in more than 50 countries. Ironically, this was the last day of the Assembly legislative session. One would think that the state of New York would pass bills that protect public health and the environment. The Senate did just that, but sadly not the Assembly. The Senate passed over 30 major environmental bills that reduced our exposure, a moratorium on spreading sludge on farmland, and for the second year in a row, the Senate passed the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, sponsored by Senator Pete Harckham. In sharp contrast, the Assembly only passed one major environmental bill that already passed the Senate. The Senate passed the Comprehensive New York Heat Act and then also a scaled back version of the Heat Act. They sent both bills to the Assembly. The Assembly would only pass the scaled back version of the New York Heat Act dealing with the 100-foot rule. One major bill passed by the New York State Assembly in this moment when Donald Trump is launching a major assault on our environmental protections. Speaker Hasty's response was that the Assembly has passed environmental bills in recent years. He put out a statement noting that the Assembly passed the climate law. That was 2019, 6 years ago. His statement referenced the Environmental Bond Act. That was in 2022. And he referenced a pollinator bill, which is a great bill, but that passed last year. The key part of the Speaker's statement is he did not refute the fact that the Assembly failed to take significant action on the environment this year, he referenced previous years. And this is at a moment when every state Assembly member understands the federal assault on environmental protection. One of the biggest disappointments was the failure to pass the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. That bill would have required a 30% reduction in single-use packaging spread out over 12 years. We know that 16,000 toxic chemicals are used to make plastic. This bill would have phased out just 17 of the most toxic chemicals, including lead, mercury, and PFAS chemicals. This bill had enormous support from local governments around the state because it put a fee on packaging so that the packaging companies paid for the collection and disposal of packaging, not you and I as taxpayers. And finally, the bill would not allow for chemical recycling to count as real recycling. Senator Harckham and Assemblymember Glick worked really, really hard to pass this bill in both houses. In the Assembly, there are 77 co-sponsors of this bill, a majority of the members of the Assembly. The packaging bill passed every committee it was assigned to in the Assembly. It passed in the Environmental Committee on March 4th. It passed in the Codes Committee on May 6th. And it didn't come up in Assembly Ways and Means until June 16th. Why did Speaker Hastie not allow the bill to come up in the committee agenda for almost 6 weeks after the Codes Committee voted its approval? It then passed in the Rules Committee on June 16th, and it made it to the third reading on the Assembly floor. On the final night of the legislative session, the report is that the Speaker said he convened 14 members of the Assembly who said they were yes votes, and they told the Speaker that they were reluctant yes votes. Okay, so they were reluctant, but they were yes votes. I'm reluctant to go to the dentist, but I go because it's the right thing to do. After speaking to Assembly members for months and months and scores of constituents contacting Assembly members, I believe we had the votes to pass this bill if only the Speaker would have allowed it to come to the floor for a vote. The Speaker chose not to let the bill come to the floor for a vote. And that is how the most unproductive Assembly session on environmental bills in modern history concluded. On the same day that the Trump administration rolls back the federal ban on asbestos. The Senate responded to this critical moment, and unfortunately, the Assembly did not. It's now my pleasure to introduce Monique Fitzgerald, co-founder of the Brookhaven Landfill Action and Remediation Group on Long Island. Monique?
Thank you, Judith. Thank you for inviting me here to speak about this very important issue. I'm very saddened and dismayed about what happened in this session. So like Judith said, I'm one of the co-founders of the Brookhaven Landfill Action and Remediation Group. I live in North Belport, which is the traditional land of the Enck Nation. And this landfill has been in our backyard for 50 years, even before I was born, right? It is a mountainous landfill. It's about 270 feet tall, and it has been expanded, and there's really no plan for closure for this landfill, even though it is reaching capacity, right? And we know that in New York State, several landfills are reaching capacity, and we have no plan, right? This bill was supposed to help us get to the point where we would be able to reduce our waste. Like Judith said, this would reduce our waste about 30% over 12 years, right? So this is not something that would come crashing down on communities that are trying to make these plans, or we hope are trying to make these plans for closure for the landfills. because what we don't want to see is the continued transfer of waste to other states, right? This session, I got the honor and privilege to meet Sharon from Louisiana, who shows us that this problem doesn't start here, it doesn't end here, right? So we have to do what we need to do in New York State. That's to pass these bills. This one in particular, to get the toxins out, to send a message to the plastic industry that they have to shape up, basically, or ship out. So I really don't understand the reason why this was delayed again this year. I really don't understand what the speaker is asking of us advocates to do. Like I said, I live in North Belport. That's almost 4 hours away from Albany. Going up to Albany is not an easy task for me, right? And it's not an easy task for me to ask others in my community to do. So delaying and keeping us constantly having to run up to Albany to try to do what we can to spark the assembly to do their job is not fair to us, right? It's something that we have been, again, burdened to do. Judith also explained that we're, facing these heat events, right? The hottest summer last year, we're going into another hot summer. The landfill stinks, okay? It stinks on a regular day. On a hot day, it is almost something that you cannot even imagine or bear. So, I don't want to take up too much time, but we need to close down the Brookhaven landfill. And the only way to do that responsibly is to start to reduce our waste. And this bill would have done that. And I'm so disappointed in the Assembly for not passing it this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monique. We'll now hear from Renae Kimble with the Niagara Falls NAACP.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you for having me. I am Renae Kimble, president of the NAACP Niagara Falls branch. Environmental justice is a civil right. We know that people of color, disabled, and marginalized members of society disproportionately bear the burdens of environmental hazards. In Western New York, we are acutely aware of environmental injustice. There are so many, who can keep up? But we probably have the most well-known, recognizable example of environmental injustice in the country at Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York. In 1976, Hooker Chemical Company dumped deadly toxic waste into the working class community at Love Canal, disproportionately affecting minority and marginalized city residents, some who are still suffering from the after effects today. I remember what happens to marginalized communities after being exposed to a toxic environmental tsunami. There is a higher incidence of birth defects, developmental disabilities, cancer, and death. Children that I knew came to school with tumors all over their bodies. Whole members of families were wiped out because of the exposure to the corroding waste disposal drum contents that were breaking through the grounds and seeping into basements. Millions of pounds of plastics now have been found in Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And here in Niagara Falls, we have an incinerator and a landfill that make Black, brown, disabled, and working class members of our community deathly ill. The New York State Assembly, or the People's House, decided to protect the big business, making people of color, the disabled, and other marginalized members of our society continue to be exposed to the deadly effects of contaminated packaging waste. Big business gets richer, and marginalized members of the Black, brown, and disabled communities get sicker. We will continue to fight because when we fight, we win. And we will be back next year to pass the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. That's a promise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renae. And I think what you heard from Monique and Renae in their inspired words is that there's huge public support for this bill. In fact, the Siena College poll from just this past April revealed 73% of New Yorkers supporting this bill, and a majority of Assembly members co-sponsors of this bill. It's now my pleasure to introduce my friend, Blair Horner, who is a senior policy advisor at NYPIRG.
Thank you, Judith and Renae and Monique. When you go last, of course, it's always hard to figure out what you could say to top anything or add anything of significance when you have these powerful speakers in advance. So let me just mention a couple of things, one specific to the issue and one just talking about sort of the how the Assembly handles their bills. And specific to the issue, 18 months ago, almost to the day, the Department of Environmental Conservation put out a solid waste management plan. In it, they say that we need to move to a circular economy, that producers should be responsible for the waste that they generate. They call it specifically for packaging legislation. And one of the rationales for that was that the state's landfills are filling up to their current capacity or their permits have run out, and that this is an increasing crisis of solid waste in New York. And as I mentioned, one of the things that they recommended was that producer responsibility legislation be passed. So it's not like we're making this bill up and that we dream of a world without excess packaging, although we might. The DEC has called for it. They've looked at this, and there should be a policy response. So in the context of a gigantic problem the state faces, it really is hard to imagine why the Assembly chose not to act. Now, as Judith mentioned, some of the members apparently told the Speaker that they were reluctant yeses. And in my 40 some odd years of experience in Albany, every controversial issue has reluctant yeses voting for it because that's what makes the issue controversial. I'm sure the medical aid in dying bill that passed had reluctant yeses. But that's the job of the lawmaker. The job of the lawmaker is to hammer together policy solutions to real problems. That's what this bill would have done. Just mention one sort of observation on bills passing the Assembly. This past session, 1,743 bills passed the state Senate, 995 bills passed the Assembly, with 856 being approved by both houses. And in recent years, it looks like, when you look at the numbers, that the Assembly basically kills half of the bills that come out of the state Senate. Both houses are controlled by Democrats, so presumably the problems are not ideological or partisan. I don't know what the answer is, but it happens every month. If you look at it on a month-by-month basis, the Assembly passes roughly half the bills that the Senate does. So it's by design, the Assembly Democratic Conference organizes itself during session. This bill, according to what we've heard, is a casualty of both the reluctant yeses and the timetable. We think that that's a mistake, that there's a real problem that lawmakers need to face up to. This is one of them. And we're deeply disappointed that the Assembly Democratic Conference decided to block it at the last minute. Back to you, Judith.
Thank you so much, Blair. Marissa, do you want to call just on reporters?
Yes. So if you are a reporter with a question, please put your name and outlet in the chat or raise your hand, your Zoom hand, and I'll call on you. I know we have lots of supporters here this morning who have questions, but for the interest of time, this is just for press. So Dan Clark with the Albany Times-Union, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. So Judith, in his statement, the speaker said that he implied that the Assembly actually didn't have the votes for the bill. And I know by your count that you said that you did have the votes, which makes it seem like either somebody was not being authentic with you or maybe the speaker's not being authentic. What do you think is the deal there?
I think the deal is twofold. One is our count was that there was more than enough votes to pass. And I think the rub could have been when the speaker said that there were 14 reluctant yes votes. They're still yes votes. I don't care if they're reluctant. We had the votes to pass this bill. I think it's very telling that it was not acted on until the final days of session. You know, it languished in, but I mentioned earlier, Dan, the time frame from when it passed the Codes Committee on May 6th. And admittedly, there was a late budget, but then it was not allowed to come up in Ways and Means until June 16th. And we all know when you get to the final day of session, it is a crunch. I think a major problem was the army of polluter lobbyists that descended on Albany. I was camped out in the back of the Assembly chamber, just checking votes for weeks. Members were very forthcoming. Most, especially the co-sponsors said sure. And they also weighed in with the speaker. At one point, I counted 22 special interest lobbyists in the Assembly parlor. These were national lobbyists that I'm familiar with. These were two former Democratic state senators. It was a major presence of companies that opposed this bill. And I think that led to the slow walking of the bill. The speaker is right. He is much better at vote counting than I am. And I think the disagreement is the reluctant yes votes. I mean, I think he wants them off the hook. I want them to represent their constituents and stand up for a clean environment. It doesn't really matter if they're reluctant.
And what do you think is the way forward after this? Is it, do you think any amendments to the bill are needed to make those votes less reluctant? Or do you want to keep the bill and just try to, I guess, lobby them to be less reluctant next year?
The sponsors already made 26 major amendments to this bill. All of the amendments were in response to business requests. All of the amendments weakened the bill. So we're not looking for a further weakening. We're looking for some brave leadership from the speaker and the reluctant yes votes. It's not that hard to do. 73% of New Yorkers support this bill. Now, a little bit of a silver lining is that because the bill in the Assembly made it all the way to the floor to third reading, it will now come up on the floor. We don't have to spend many months getting it through committee. And plastic pollution is not going away, and neither are we. We are energized to get this bill passed. I think it would be good to have a special session to deal with a lot of the important issues that are before the legislature. We know that the state will be hard hit by federal budget cuts. That would be a moment to bring this bill up, or we come back with strong public support in January and start with the bill on the Assembly floor. I think the sponsors have been very responsive, and I think further weakening is not necessarily going to help pass the bill.
All right, and we have a question from Rob Gavin from the Buffalo News.
Yes, hopefully you can hear me now. I guess the bill is also up in New Jersey, right? A very similar bill. Do you think that if this were to pass in a state like New Jersey or other states, does that change the chances of the bill passing next year? Is there something? I guess I'm trying to figure out, could that change? Like, what do you think it is that could make the difference? It's now 2 years in a row where it hasn't, but you've also seen situations like, you mentioned your medical aid and dying, that didn't even get to the floor for several years, and now that passed. So what do you think it is that's going to take this to finally get through?
You're right. A similar bill is introduced in New Jersey, and I think that's why you saw so many national lobbyists descend on Albany. They don't want a strong bill like this adopted because it sets a precedent for other states. I think we will eventually pass the bill with people power and with brave assembly members who go to the speaker and say, we are drowning in single-use packaging. Landfills are closing, incinerators are polluting, mostly environmental justice communities. We all have plastics in our own bodies. Plastics are made from fossil fuel and chemicals. This is a climate change issue. We want to do something effective on the environment. And quite frankly, it's pretty embarrassing for assembly members who care deeply about environmental protection to go home to their districts and say the New York State Assembly only passed one major bill on the environment in this year of Donald Trump. So I think it's going to take some leadership from the rank and file. And what's really interesting is, we talked to all of them, and the vast majority wanted to see this bill passed.
Judy, I had a question for you, follow up for you as well as for Renae. If you could talk a little bit about what kind of messaging were you getting from lawmakers in Western New York in the assembly, from Crystal People-Stokes down. I know there were some people that were co-sponsors on the bill. What was the message that you delivered to them, and what was the response you got from them, if you could share that?
Yeah, Renae, why don't you go first and then I'll follow up?
Yes, people reached out to the majority leader and reached out to the majority leader's staff person in Albany and also the chief of staff in Western New York. And we did not really hear anything from the majority leader, no more than what she said in the newspaper that was printed in the Buffalo News, that she was aware and that if the bill came up on the floor, then there would be a vote on it. But she never did indicate if, in fact, she would be voting in support or in opposition.
And your feelings about that, is that something, have you expressed to the majority leader your feelings about this, or other members from Western New York, your feelings being someone from Western New York?
Well, I would hope that the majority leader would support the bill. She's very much aware of Love Canal, but she's also aware of the fact that there are just serious environmental issues in Western New York in which are not just dealing with the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act, but also regarding just climate change, air pollution, and they have a major fight regarding, the Kensington Expressway and how the environmental pollution is disproportionately affecting members of the Black community in which she is a representative of. So I would think that she would be sensitive to these issues and concerns, especially when it affects members of her constituent base. So I'm hopeful that she will be in support and that she will do the right thing and vote in support of this when it comes up next year or whenever it comes up in the assembly.
And other members of the Western New York delegation?
I would hope that they would do the same. Like I said, they represent areas that have been in the forefront. When you have a Love Canal in Western New York, when you have um, um, incinerators that are just, burning and poisoning people in your community. And I would hope that they would be in support and not, all of them, not just the Democratic members, but also the Republican members. And unfortunately, the Republican members have been in opposition, and I would hope that that would change, that they would understand that they are representing a constituency that is disproportionately being impacted by their neglect. So I would hope that they would all support and think about what's in the best interests of the community and not think about what's in the best interests of big business.
And Rob, I would just add that I spoke with Assembly Member Patrick Burke on the last night of session. He was very supportive. He told the speaker he was supportive. Same with Assemblymember McMahon. And then on the Senate side, Senator Ryan switched his vote. And last year, unfortunately, he voted against this bill. But this year, he listened to his constituents and voted yes on the Senate floor. So we've got some good leadership in Western New York, but we sure need the majority leader to act on what Renae just laid out.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to close. Please reach out if you have any.
Marissa, let me just make
Yes.
one additional observation. I mean, the Trump administration that Judith laid out, this sort of horrible record that it has on the environment. But when the Congress and the president get done with whatever budget scheme they come up with, it's going to have an impact on the state's finances. And this bill was supported by local governments for a reason, and it's going to help save them money. And so I would think that this should be in the sort of the no-brainer category in terms of legislative action, certainly going into next year, because everywhere the state is going to be looking under every sofa cushion to save money and to generate revenues.
And I think if they come back into special session in the fall, which I hear they might, it's going to be a laser focus on fiscal issues. And Beyond Plastics put out a report just this past April identifying over 1.2 billion in savings to local governments over the next 10 years from avoided cost, not having to bring so much waste to the Brookhaven landfill, which is so polluting already, or the Niagara Falls garbage incinerator. That financial analysis doesn't even count the new revenue that local governments would receive from the modest fees on packaging. So I think this is perfect for a fall special session that is dealing with the fiscal issues that are facing the state because of the anticipated federal cuts.
All right. And on that, we will close. Thank you all for joining. Please reach out to me if you have any questions today or ever. And have a great rest of your day.